I knew the day was going badly when the shuttle's AI announced we'd been politely abducted. It sounded very apologetic for a kidnapping, even offered complimentary snacks, which somehow made it worse. By the time the shuttle docked at the Imperial Spire, I'd accepted that today would be one of those life-changing, therapy-requiring experiences. The doors slid open, and a platoon of armored guards waved glowing spears at me, because apparently the Empire had skipped right over energy shields and gone straight to disco-themed weaponry. They marched me down endless crystalline halls until we reached a throne room so huge it probably had its own weather cycle. At the center stood the new queen, ears long and elegant, moving like soft antennae as if she were receiving cosmic radio stations. She studied me with the curious intensity of a scientist, confronting a new species of confused mammal, which, to be fair, was exactly what I was. Then she smiled, and the guards tensed like she'd just activated a doomsday device. Instead, she walked down the steps toward me until she stood close enough that I could see tiny silver flecks in her eyes. She announced, in a tone used for royal decrees and maybe grocery lists, that I was fascinating, and that the Empire was fortunate to have acquired me. I tried to inform her that humans were not collectible items, but she tilted her head, ears lifting in what I assumed was confusion, and declared I was now under her personal protection. I asked what the return policy on that was. She didn't get the joke, or maybe she did because her ears flicked and the guards looked like they were ready to faint. They escorted me to a chamber so luxurious it made five-star hotels look like sad emergency shelters. I assumed it was a temporary holding cell. Wrong. It was apparently my new residence. When I protested, the queen simply appeared in the doorway, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the fruit dispenser that kept trying to force-feed me glowing berries. She said she wished to understand my emotional state, which was generous phrasing considering my emotional state was screaming. I tried diplomacy. I explained cultural norms, personal autonomy, and the fact that I had a job back home that definitely did not include interstellar royal consort duties. She listened with great seriousness, then calmly informed me that humans in distress were adorable and that my leaving was strategically unacceptable. I asked for clarification on strategically. She said my presence stabilized her, which would have been flattering if it didn't make me sound like a living stress ball. The palace staff began treating me like a curiosity. One tried scanning me with a device that beeped wildly, declaring I had alarmingly average biology. Another asked if all humans were as small as me. I said I wasn't small. The palace was just built for people with legs the length of hoverskiffs. Even the queen started showing up unexpectedly, usually interrupting me right when I was trying to find an escape route on the room's console. She had no concept of knocking. Instead, she'd appear, ears perked, asking questions about Earth life, like why humans used chairs instead of floating relaxation pods. I told her chairs were comfortable. She looked at me like I'd confessed to worshipping furniture. Every attempt to negotiate my release ended with her misunderstanding me in new and creative ways. When I said I needed space, she assigned me personal guards to ensure I had ample breathing room. When I said I wanted freedom, she said freedom was an illusion constructed by societal hierarchies, which sounded very deep until she added that keeping me close was an act of emotional solidarity. I told her that emotional solidarity usually involved consent. She paused, considering this like it was an advanced philosophical puzzle, then softly announced she would work on that. Despite everything, there were moments, small, dangerous moments, where I caught glimpses of someone just as overwhelmed as I was. During one official ceremony, she nearly tripped over her own cape and pretended it was intentional. During another, she whispered that the crown itched and asked if humans also suffered from ceremonial discomforts. When I joked that uncomfortable ceremonies were humanity's greatest cosmic constant, her ears lifted with genuine amusement. It was the first time I'd seen her laugh, and it hit me with a strange warmth I absolutely did not approve of. Still, the situation was absurd. I wanted home. She wanted me nearby like I was some kind of emotional anchor. The palace wanted to study me like a mildly interesting lab sample. And somewhere in the middle of all this, I found myself laughing more often than panicking, mostly because the alternative was losing my mind. Yet every time I planned an escape, those long ears would flick in my direction from across the room, as though she could sense my thoughts. Maybe she could. Maybe Queens came with built-in human tracking software. Either way, by the end of the first week, I realized one thing with terrible clarity. Leaving the Empire was not going to be simple. Not with her watching me like a star I might suddenly fall from. Not with the strange sincerity behind her possessiveness. And definitely not with those ears acting like emotional weather vanes every time I breathed. I learned very quickly that being the Queen's protected human came with unexpected side effects, like palace staff bowing every time I sneezed. Apparently in their culture, a sneeze meant cosmic energy release. So, after the third sneeze of the morning, a healer rushed over with a hovering crystal that hummed so loudly it frightened both of us. I tried to explain that humans just had allergies. The healer nodded solemnly and said this was a rare and powerful condition. Word spread so fast that by lunchtime, half the palace believed I was leaking divine particles. I considered using this to negotiate my freedom, but knowing my luck, they just built a shrine around me. The Queen checked on me throughout the day, her long ears flicking with each excuse she invented for why she just happened to be passing by. Once she claimed she was inspecting the wall panels for structural integrity, even though she was poking them like someone testing fruit at a market. When I asked if she was actually worried about me, she stiffened, and her ears did this strange half-lift, half-collapse movement I was starting to recognize as her version of blushing. She insisted she was simply fulfilling her duty to maintain the well-being of the Empire's most precious, diplomatic variable. I told her that was the worst nickname anyone had ever given me. She looked proud of herself, which was concerning. Her political responsibilities grew heavier by the day, and somehow I kept being dragged into them. During a treaty signing, an ambassador challenged her claim that humans were peaceful creatures. She looked straight at me and declared that humans were gentle, cooperative, and prone to emotional honesty. I choked on my drink. She took this as confirmation. The ambassador bowed. I tried not to make eye contact for the rest of the ceremony. In private, she admitted rulership was harder than she expected. Not the commanding fleet's part. Apparently she was brilliant at that. But the politics, the constant demands, the assassins who kept sending her fruit baskets with suspicious glowing cores. When I suggested implementing a better security protocol, she asked if humans traditionally assisted monarchs with such matters. I said no. Humans traditionally avoided being near anything that exploded. She nodded gravely and assigned me an advisory role anyway. There was even a badge. It glowed. I hated how cool it looked. Her affection for me kept growing in strange, unplanned ways. Once, during a council meeting, she became so distracted watching me fidget with my sleeve that she agreed to fund a new planetary defense system without hearing the proposal. When she realized what she'd done, she blamed me, saying I was visually disruptive. I told her that was rude. She said it was also true. I didn't argue because her ears were doing that softened, relaxed curve that meant she was happy, and for reasons I refused to examine, I didn't want to ruin it. But not everything was harmless affection. Whispers circulated through the palace, factions questioning whether her attachment to a human made her weak. Some wanted to separate us for the stability of the empire. Others wanted to use me as leverage. I overheard two advisors arguing about which faction would win custody of me if the throne ever shifted. I interrupted to say I was not a puppy. They bowed and asked if I preferred the term honored pet. I walked away before I committed a diplomatic incident. One evening, after a particularly tense council session, The queen appeared in my room again, this time without an excuse. She looked exhausted, the weight of the crown making her posture stiff. I expected another attempt to keep me close, but instead she sat down across from me, close enough that I could hear the faint hum beneath her skin, part biology, part energy modulation all her people had. She admitted she didn't know how to balance what she felt with what the empire required. I told her I didn't know how to balance wanting my freedom with the fact that her presence didn't terrify me as much as it used to. She looked at me with wide, unguarded eyes, ears lifting slowly like sunrise. Then she thanked me, not as a queen, as someone who didn't know how to be lonely anymore. I didn't know what to say, so I joked that she owed me hazard pay. She actually considered it, calculating compensation rates based on emotional turbulence with occasional political danger. I told her it was a joke. She told me humans made complicated jokes. The palace felt different after that, more eyes on me, more shadows in the halls, more tension threading through every interaction. But whenever she passed me, her ears would tilt toward me, subtle but unmistakable, like a silent reassurance that she saw me even through the chaos. And for the first time since my abduction, I felt something unsettling and warm settle in my chest. Maybe I wasn't just a curiosity anymore. Maybe I was becoming something far more dangerous for both of us. The rebellion announced itself at dawn by blowing up the royal laundry tower, which, according to the palace staff, was the rudest possible target. I was still half asleep when alarms blared and my room sealed itself shut like a panicked clam. A guard shouted through the door that I was to remain calm, which felt like an unrealistic expectation, given that the floor was vibrating and my bed had started drifting toward the ceiling. I shouted back asking if this counted as hazard pay. No one laughed. The queen appeared moments later after forcing the doors open with a wave of her hand, which was impressive because the doors were rated to withstand meteor impacts. Her long ears were stiff with tension, but the moment she saw me, they tilted in relief. She said the rebels wanted to capture me to destabilize her emotionally. I told her that was too much pressure for someone who still couldn't figure out how to order breakfast on the palace console. She declared that was exactly why she had to keep me safe, which felt like a backhanded compliment. We rushed through the corridors, dodging sparks and bits of architecture that definitely weren't supposed to be on fire. She kept insisting she could handle the coup, but the flickering lights and distant explosions suggested otherwise. When we reached the command chamber, it became clear the rebels had infiltrated more deeply than expected. Screens flashed with red warnings. Advisors argued. A hologram of the Empire's territories flickered like a nervous ghost. The Queen took charge with the force of someone who could wrestle a star into submission, but even I could see the strain in the way her ears kept twitching. Then the rebels breached the perimeter. The Queen pulled me behind the throne, which was apparently the safest place in the entire spire. I told her that if the throne was so safe, she should sit in it. She said she wasn't leaving me unguarded. I said I didn't need guarding. She raised one eyebrow, as if listing every moment I'd accidentally walked into danger since arriving. I conceded her point. A rebel squad stormed the hall, led by an advisor I recognized, someone who'd once asked if humans shed their skin monthly. He declared the Queen unfit, pointing at me as proof of her emotional corruption. I told him emotional corruption sounded dramatic for someone who organized meetings via color-coded scented smoke. He didn't appreciate the joke. He ordered his troops to seize me. The Queen didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, energy flaring around her like a living shield. Then a blast struck near her, sending shockwaves through the room. Instinct took over. Instead of hiding, I grabbed the nearest object, a floating ceremonial crate, and hurled it at the rebels. It didn't hit anyone, but it startled them enough to break their formation. The Queen shot me a look of horrified admiration. I shouted that improvisation was a core human trait. She shouted that reckless heroism was not. Together, in a chaotic mix of her refined power and my deeply questionable Earth tactics, we pushed back the rebels. When reinforcements finally arrived, the coup began to collapse like a badly scripted drama. The advisor was arrested, loudly insisting he'd been misunderstood. I suggested he try explaining that to the smoking hole he'd left in the wall. When the danger passed, the Queen turned to me, her ears softening slowly as adrenaline faded. She thanked me for protecting her, though I pointed out that I mostly caused property damage. She said the gesture mattered. Then, in a quieter tone, she admitted that my presence didn't just steady her, it reminded her she wasn't ruling alone, that she didn't have to. Later, in the quiet aftermath, we walked through the ruined hall,